U.S. pressure has been an integral part of U.S.-Israel relations since 1948. In hindsight, it resembles bumps in the road of staggering, mutually beneficial U.S.-Israel cooperation, militarily and commercially, which has exceeded expectations. In most cases, the pressure has been defied by Israel, triggering short-term friction, but long-term strengthened U.S. strategic appreciation of Israel. For instance, at the end of a 1991 meeting between Prime Minister Shamir and Senate Majority and Minority leaders, Senators George Mitchell and Bob Dole, which was replete with disagreements, the latter, Senator Dole, said, "Mr. Prime Minister, do you know why the Majority Leader and I absolutely disagree with you, but immensely respect you? Because you are tough. On a rainy day, the U.S. prefers a strong backbone, principle-driven ally who does not succumb to pressure, refusing to sacrifice long-term historic and national security assets on the altar of short-term diplomatic, economic, and strategic convenience." In fact, Israel's defiance of U.S. pressure, which has been mostly instigated by the State Department's misreading of the Middle East, has spared the U.S. major setbacks. For example, if Israel had surrendered to U.S. pressure in 1981 and 2007, it would not have destroyed nuclear reactors in Iraq and Syria, which spared the U.S., Saudi Arabia, and other pro-U.S. oil-producing Arab countries a traumatic 1990-1991 confrontation with a nuclear Saddam Hussein. It also eliminated the horrific option of a nuclear civil war in Syria, a nuclear ISIS, or a nuclear Assad. If Israel had succumbed to pressure in 1948-1949 to withdraw to the suicidal lines of the 1947 partition plan, Israel would not have evolved into the most reliable and effective force multiplier for the U.S. This spared the U.S. the necessity of deploying more aircraft carriers and ground troops in the Indian Ocean and the Mediterranean, saving an annual cost of mega billion of dollars. If Israel had submitted to the 1967 U.S. pressure, it would not have preempted and crushed the Soviet-backed Egyptian, Syrian, Jordanian military offensive, expunging the Egyptian-Soviet drive to topple all pro-U.S. Arab oil-producing regimes. This would have devastated the U.S. economy and national security at a time when the U.S. was heavily dependent on Persian Gulf oil. If Israel had not fended off severe U.S. pressure and refrained from the application of Israeli law to the Golan Heights, and eventually retreating from the Golan Heights, it would not have been able to constrain Russian, Iranian, and Syrian maneuverability in Syria and Lebanon, while bolstering the national security of the pro-U.S. Hashemite regime in Jordan, which has enhanced U.S. interest. If Israel had not stood up to U.S. pressure, allowing the establishment of a Palestinian state west of the Jordan River, it would have led to the toppling of the pro-U.S. Hashemite regime east of the Jordan River, transforming Jordan into an uncontrollable platform of anti-U.S. Islamic terrorism, posing a lethal threat to all the pro-U.S. oil-producing Arab regimes. This would have upgraded the stature of Iran, Russia, and China at the expense of the U.S. economy, national security, and homeland security. The bottom line is that principle-driven defiance of U.S. pressure is critical to Israel's posture of deterrence, which is a major component of U.S. posture in the Middle East, generating stability and deterring anti-US rogue entities. Moreover, Israeli failure to fend off pressure yields more pressure, which would erode Israel's posture of deterrence, intensifying terror and war, and destabilizing the Middle East at the expense of Israel, pro-US Arab regimes, and the US economy and defense. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe. Be sure to hit the notification button for more videos. The next video will present the impact of the proposed Palestinian state on US interests. For more information on US-Israel ties and Middle East affairs, please write to yoramtex@gmail.com and or visit theettingerreport.com.